And before I do, I just want to remind everyone what was said by the central bank in their headings regarding their key findings. So they said AIB failed to consider the entitlements of customers when it withdrew the tracker mortgage product. It breached customers' mortgage contracts, delayed in rectifying the breach, and failed to take immediate and conclusive action to determine for these customers the financial implications of the bank's wrongdoing. It wrongfully excluded customers' mortgage accounts. It failed to handle customer complaints in a fair and consistent manner. It failed to manage its mortgage services to customers, resulting in breaches of customers' consumer protection rights, etc. And it failed to properly implement the Stop the Harm principles. Now, that's what the central bank said about the tracker mortgage issue and the fine that it was imposing on AIB. Now, so it failed their customers. It said that they brought unacceptable harm and loss over 18 years and that AIB's actions had devastating consequences. Now, if that was said by another company or said about another company, you'll probably have, I would imagine, a clear out of the directors. You would certainly have whoever was left there asking the question of senior managers to consider their positions at least. Now, none of that happened. None of that happened. There was 57 regulatory breaches. They were fined 119 million. But they got a discount of 30%. I don't know anybody that gets a discount like that when they've done so much damage. And you know, the number of houses that were repossessed and families destroyed and the litany of errors and goes on and on and on. So we're asking that same bank with that record to treat fairly the EBS tied agents. Now I'm just taking that away, not making little of the customers that are affected or were affected, or indeed the other issues relating to the bank. But that's the backdrop, and that's the EBS. So in parliamentary questions, I think it's your own department, informed those that asked that IASA would examine the issues that they had. But IASA wouldn't do it. They didn't refuse to do it, but they didn't actively pursue it. And then when they were pushed, they said that they would deal with it, but that they would deal with the complaint from the EBS stroke AIB behind closed doors. Now that is what has the country the way it is. So then the EBS tied agents, they went to the central bank, and the central bank won't investigate. They won't investigate. Even though under Section 37 of the Building Societies Act, the central bank have to ensure that EBS is financially sound, going back to the root of this problem. And the ODCE has refused to examine instances where banks refuse to disclose their true financial position or to disclose it correctly. And it goes back to the definition of capital losses used by IBRC as well, and it's not compatible with that of the European Union. So whether you believe or not all of what's being said in that, with the backdrop of AIB behind it, it begins to emerge that actually all of these entities that are supposed to be in charge and have the powers, they do very little. They pretend, and people go on suffering. So when I asked AIB about the EBS, you know, they were reluctant to give any real update because it's in mediation or it's in process. I consider that from the AIB to be absolutely shambolic. And I want to ask you, Minister, in the light of all of that, will you tell AIB to stop the carry-on with the EBS tied agents and to bring about a resolution of some sort to it, in view of what the central bank said about the AIB? I don't know how you could trust them, but can you ask them?
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you for raising this issue, as you regularly do. And I know this has been an issue that has caused an awful lot of difficulty for the people whom you were raising it on behalf of. You know that I can't tell AIB to act in a certain way in relation to this. It goes back to the issue of commercial independence that I have to respect, that I've already covered off in this committee. But I will, as I always do when you raise this issue with me, I will ask for a report in relation to the matter and I'll share it with you. But I cannot tell AIB what to do.
Well, you do know that it is this type of carry-on and the carry-on of the respective bodies that I've mentioned who fail to do what they should be doing that actually gives the whole political system a bad name. And I want to ask you, I heard your reply in relation to EBS. I'm going to continue to pursue it. The committee decided this morning that they would bring in some EBS tied agents again, just to continue to keep the pressure on them, because just like those involved in the tracker mortgage issue, these people and their families are being hung out to dry by AIB. And I'm sure that when they read the findings of the central bank, they must be utterly disgusted that it is that type of organisation that they're dealing with. And I don't paint all of the employees in AIB with the one brush, but I certainly question the culture of their board and their management. And any reasonable person would do that. So I'm asking you now, the second question, are you not surprised, or are you surprised, that there was no clear out of directors, there was no sanction of managers at a higher level? There was nothing like that. And that the central bank imposed a fine of 119 and gave a reduction of 30%, and then would not disclose anything after that. Is that something?
Well,
we're not being served well, are we?
Well, I believe our regulator in the central bank has put a huge amount of effort into this investigation and have been instrumental in dealing with what is a scandal. And I also believe that we as a political class don't serve ourselves well if we look to, not recognise the work that regulators have now done that are strengthened and with new powers. It is also the case, which you do very well, Chairman, that when these regulators come in here through the central bank, that you raise issues with them that are of concern to you. But in relation to what they have done, the overall fine that they have brought in is €96.7 million. My understanding is the reason why a discount was made available was then alongside that the AIB accepted liability, did not look to dispute the penalty. And if I look at, for example, the current chief executive of AIB, he was not chief executive at the time in which this issue occurred in relation to tracker mortgages. And from engaging with him, I do believe he is committed to trying to bring this issue to a resolution in terms of the tracker mortgage issue. But I do believe overall that our regulator has used new and extensive powers that we've made available to them extensively. But I haven't always been happy between the engagement between the regulator and our banks, which was why I became involved in this issue myself a number of years ago.
I haven't commented on the work of the central bank or indeed the man in charge of AIB. I'm talking about the general culture and the fact that at the end of the day someone is responsible for it. So it has to be asked, why has no one been held to account, no individual, in spite of all of the destruction that all of the banks involved brought on the people of this country that are supposed to be protected by the government that it elects. And I would say to you in relation to the central bank, when they came before this committee first, way back at the beginning of this, the regulator told us there was 3,000 to 4,000 cases, he wasn't sure. In AIB alone, there was over 10,000. And there are still cases unresolved. And the banks are as difficult now in bringing about a resolution to those outstanding accounts as they were in the very beginning of this. And I just find that totally unacceptable. And this House and you in the Department are pushed to one side as we leave everything to the regulator. So my next question is, you're bringing in a new central bank bill. Will you, in that bill, give authority to the regulator to say much more about fines that will be imposed in the future? He's restricted, as I understand it now, in certain ways. And I believe that the public have a right to know just what skullduggery was going on in the banks, and that the regulator needs to have a freer hand to deal with what is a greedy industry that seems to have no rules or regulations in-house for themselves. Otherwise, now you said that that AIB cooperated. But why wouldn't they cooperate? We had witnesses all around this room who explained what happened to their homes and their families when AIB stripped them of the tracker mortgage and stripped them of the opportunity to have it dealt with because they ignored the customer's rights. And that is said in the statement from the central bank. So will you use the new legislation or new bill that you're bringing forward to include in that far greater powers for the regulator to name and shame any of the banking institutions or anyone else that they deal with in relation to this?
So, Deputy, I must have misheard you earlier on, because I did comment on the regulator and AIB and the current Chief Executive of AIB, and you said to me there a moment ago, you know, you weren't commenting on them. But I do think you said earlier on that you felt we weren't well served by our regulator, and you did make the point to me regarding why there hadn't been change in AIB. And I do think it's important to say a few things and maybe repeat very quickly what I just said a few moments ago. Firstly, what happened is a scandal. I'm as aware as you are of all the suffering that took place in relation to it. Secondly, the current Chief Executive of AIB and the current senior management in AIB. Well, firstly, the current Chief Executive of AIB was not Chief Executive when this happened. And secondly, my understanding is that there has been huge change at a senior level within all of our banks, at personnel level, since the behaviour that we're referring to occurred, and since the tracker mortgage decisions were made. And as much as I agree with you on the scandal and the harm that has been done, like, I couldn't agree with you regarding the description of our banks there, saying that there's no rules or regulations.
There wasn't.
Well, now, saying there's no rules or
No, but I'm
regulations
talking
now.
about what was there then.
Well, that's okay. Well, again, I must have misunderstood what you said. Look,
Well, maybe I'm not representing myself properly, but I have to say to the Minister that what was going on then, yes, it was unacceptable, but it would be still going on if it were not for the courageous efforts of those that had tracker mortgages to put their personal lives out into the public domain and to explain what was going on.
But it's important to be crystal clear about the change that has happened then, now versus then. And it's important also to refer to the further changes that we are bringing in. I mean, we have significantly strengthened, Chairman, the powers of our regulator and the resources that are available to them to ensure that our banks are better regulated and that the behaviour that you've played your role in bringing to light is either not repeated again or the chances of it ever happening again are massively reduced. And in the legislation that I'm bringing forward, and thank you to the committee for their role in allowing me to get to this point with the legislation, we are bringing in significant change at individual level to do all we can that if something like this does happen again, sanction is possible at an individual level. And that's why we're bringing it forward. It's taken some time to do it, but we are bringing it forward. And I also do believe that cultural change has taken place in our banks. I do accept they do need to do more. I do accept they need to explain more their awareness of the needs of customers and their obligation to them. But I believe overall, if you look at the legislative change that has happened and the legislation I'm bringing forward, we're in a very different place to where we were in 2009 and 2010.
I would still go back, Minister, and say that in the peak of this, people lost their homes, but no one lost their job. I mean, it's astonishing when you, with time, when you can read about it and look at it and digest what happened to people. And then alongside that, to read the central bank commentary and then to understand that actually nothing happened to the bank. Nobody within the bank who was of a senior position decided that that happened on my watch, I should go, or you did something wrong and you should go.
Yeah.
Nothing like that happened. I just think it's incredible.
But Chairman, I met the people, representatives of the group myself, who've been affected by this. I've met constituents who've gone through the very kind of misery that you're referring to and that you and the committee have highlighted, and I'm well aware of the hurt that was caused. But I would make the case that surely the language of the regulator in condemning what had happened and the magnitude of the fine that they have imposed does matter. And the fact that they've done that is the kind of thing that many years ago, in terms of how our banks were regulated, wasn't happening, and it is happening now. Right. And your point, which I do accept, Deputy, your point there regarding what has happened to the individuals that were involved in decisions that were made. You know, this is the reason why we are bringing forward further improvements in this area through the SEER legislation. And I'm not aware of there being a kind of a legislative constraint upon the ability of the regulator to comment on decisions that they've made. But of course, Deputy, if I'm bringing forward the legislation, there are improvements that can be made to further and build the confidence that people have in our regulator and make their operation perhaps a bit more transparent and easy to understand. If you have suggestions in that area and they'll improve the bill, I'm happy to consider them. And if I can further improve the legislation as it moves through the Oireachtas, of course I will.
Okay. Well, I'm going to engage with that bill because we'll probably do pre-leg scrutiny on it and all of that.
I think pre-leg scrutiny has already happened on the bill.
Oh, sorry.
But we're going to do second stage, and then I'll be back here for committee.
So therefore, we'll be back for committee.
Ample opportunity.
And vulture funds, just to touch on them again, I think that there is a need maybe within that bill to reach out and make them more accountable, to this House at least, so we can question them because they refuse to come in. And I would ask you to look at the various digital platforms that are there now for people to take up accounts. And some of the companies offering the accounts are not regulated here in this country, and we need to look at that. On credit unions, I think that we have held back credit unions for way too long. I think they have an awful lot more to offer, and whatever you do in this bill, I think we need to deal with how they are regulated, and indeed lessen the load of regulation on them without damaging the need to have control through a regulator, but to allow them to loan more. I'm thinking in particular of what used to be known as the penny bank, where you brought your savings to the community centre. It was lodged then. Since the removal of that, I've had numerous people tell me how that way of saving for them was critical for their family, and it kept the door closed to moneylenders. Small little things like that in people's lives make a huge difference.
Well, I think Minister Fleming has done a great job, and I've been happy to support him and help him in this work and engage with the credit union movement regarding bringing forward some very practical changes that I think are being well received by our credit unions. And as I did say to Deputy Durkin a moment ago, I believe there is clearly a lot of change happening organically in our credit union movement in terms of new loans that they are providing and new sectors which they're now engaging with. And then in relation to the point that you made, Chairperson, regarding the SEER legislation and the breadth of who it will cover, it is of course open to the central bank regarding who they bring in to the breadth of the SEER legislation in the time ahead, and they will determine that. But I think in fairness, there's an awful lot of institutions going to be coming under the coverage of this legislation when it's brought in, and I think there's a case to be made for getting that right first before we bring new organisations or institutions into it.
My last question relates to revenue, and a particular case that was heard here at the Finance Committee, perhaps in the last during the last Dáil term, and that's to do with a complaint made by a man named Allo Mohin, and a meeting which was held with Revenue present. Two principal officers apparently were present on August 25th, 2017. Now, I understand that there's been extensive correspondence to your department on the matter. I don't expect you to know the update on it now, but I would ask that we will be given some form of update on the discussion that we had here with Mr. Mohan, his efforts from 2005 up to 2015 or 2017, when he met with some colleagues and with the two revenue officials, and what action might be taken out of that, or had been taken. If we can't get the full report, you might just give us an indicative position as to, generally where the complaint went to, because it had to do with the loss of revenue for the state. So that's the interest that I have, and I suppose the treatment of taxpayers generally should be the same. And Mr. Mohan believes and has the evidence to prove that it wasn't the same, not only in his case, but right across particular agri sectors. So that's my question.